In this video, we are trying to understand different concepts like individual demand schedule and individual demand curve, market demand schedule and market demand curve. Now, before we go ahead, let us understand some gross meanings of these terms. As the name suggests, individual demand. What do you mean by individual demand? Very common. Individual is single. So, an individual demand is a demand created by an individual. Technically, when I try to explain individual demand is the quantity of a specific commodity demanded or purchased by a consumer or an individual consumer in a given period of time at a specific price. Whereas the name suggests market demand. Well, we know that in market there is one consumer or there are many consumers or many buyers. Yes, there are many buyers. So a market demand is a total aggregative demands of all the buyers for the specific commodity. Yes, so individual demand is quantity of particular commodity demanded by individuals. Market demand is a total sum aggregative demands of quantity of commodity demanded by all the consumers. In technical terms, when I try to define market demand is a sum or aggregate of all the quantities demanded or purchased by all the buyers at a specific price in a given time period. Now there is another concept we're gonna learn in this video is demand schedule. Demand schedule is a tabular representation. It's a graphical representation of price and quantity demanded. So demand schedule represent a functional representation of price and quantity demanded. So in demand schedule we try to represent different prices and across which what are the different quantities demanded by the consumers. Let us go back and try to identify their meanings and concept in a greater detail. So I'll focus on individual stuff first. Individual demands. As the name suggests, what is individual demand? It's a demand posed or raised by an individual. Technically, individual demand is a quantity of a commodity demanded or purchased by an individual at a specific price in the given period of time. In simple words, individual demands is quantity demanded by individuals. Now this whole individual demand can be nicely represented in individual demand schedule. So what is individual demand schedule? It's a tabular representation of different commodity demanded or bought by an individual consumer at a different prices. So in a table you can identify at price 10 of a specific commodity, let's say A, there are 5 products demanded. At price 8, there are 10 products demanded. At price 6, there are 15 products demanded. At price 4, there are 20 products demanded. At price 2, there are 25 products demanded. So if you happen to plot the graph of this data, you'll try to see this phenomenon. That on an x-axis, you'll try to represent the quantity of demanded, and on y-axis, you'll try to represent the price of the commodity. So at 10 rupees, only 5 products are demanded. As the price goes down, at 8 rupees, there are 10 products demanded. At 6 rupees, there are 15 products demanded, and so on. So when we represent this data, we try to identify that this demand curve dt is sloping downward. It means when the price decreases, demand increases, or when the price increases, demand decreases. So it's a sloping downward curve for individual demand. Technically speaking, it represents inverse relationship between price and demand. Same concept can be nicely seen with market demand. See, what is market demand? In market, there are many buyers, many consumers. So, market demand is the total quantity demanded or purchased by all the consumers, all the buyers at a specific price in a given period of time. In simple words, it's a total of all the quantity demanded at a price and a time. This whole idea is very useful typically in macroeconomics also. Let us try to understand this market demand with a market demand schedule. Market demand schedule is a tabular representation of aggregate quantity demanded by all the consumers in a market at different prices. So let us take this with an example. Let's say in a market there are only three consumers: consumer A, consumer B, consumer C, and the demand for a product, let's say X. So in this chart, the first column will try to represent the price of a commodity, and the second, third and fourth column will represent the quantity demanded at different prices of the same commodity by consumer A, consumer B and consumer C. And the last column try to represent the total, the sum of all horizontal demanded quantities. So that will in turn lead to market demand, quantity demanded by all the consumers. So for me, market demand is summation of all the consumers' demands. It's a horizontal summation. So we horizontally add those numbers. While this market demand schedule is what at different prices of a commodity, how the demand of different product has been demanded by different consumers is represented, and the functional relationship between price and market demand has been shown. So in this chart, when the price of a commodity is 10 rupees, consumer A demands 5 products, consumer B demands 10, consumer C demands 15 products. So in all, total 30 products are demanded. If the price goes down at 8 rupees, then consumer A demands it at 10 quantity, 10 units, consumer B at 15 and consumer C at 20. So in turn, it turns out to be total 45 units. When the price further goes down at 6 rupees, consumer A try to buys it at 15 quantities, consumer B buys in 20 quantities and consumer C buys at 25 quantities. So in turn total 60. And as the chart progresses further, you can see as the price goes down, the quantity purchased are increasing. So this chart, when we try to represent on a graph, x-axis will try to represent the quantity demanded, the aggregate quantity demanded by all the consumers, in turn the last column of the table. And y-axis will try to represent what? It's a price of a commodity, different prices of commodity. So if you happen to understand, at 10 rupees there are total 30 commodities are demanded. At 8 rupees it is 45, at 6 rupees it is 60, at 4 rupees it is 75 and at 2 rupees it is 90. So if we join this graph, we get a demand curve which is sloping downward. We can identify that there is an inverse relationship between price and demand. The demand curve is sloping downwards. As the price decreases, the demand for the product increases, or vice versa. If the price increases, demand for the product decreases. So this demand aggregate market demand schedules, demand curves helps us understand the nature of the functional relationship between price and demand.